Alrighty then, how's it going guys? And welcome to part 5 of Beverage 101. Today we are going to be discussing wine. Now just a heads up, this is going to be a long video because you could literally talk for hours about wine and only just scratch the surface. But today we are just going to be going through some of the basics and maybe flesh out some small things. Okay, so to start off with, what is wine? Well, wine is a fermented beverage which is made from grapes. Okay, which grapes? Many different types of grapes. We'll get more onto that in a minute, but essentially that's what wine is. It's just fermented grape juice. Okay, so how long has wine been around? Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think anybody really truly knows. There is evidence as far back as ancient Egypt of wine, except the only difference is that the wine that they would have had back then was far different to the wine that we have today. The wine that they had back then was watery and tasted horrible, and it's like the purpose of it was not so much about like getting drunk. It was more about drinking something that was cleaner than the water that they had back then, because they didn't know about microbiology or anything like that, and the presence of alcohol in wine would have kept it sterile and safe to drink. So you were better off drinking this watery, crappy tasting fermented grape juice than you were drinking water out of a well. So the wine as we know it today is predominantly because of the French. The French really took wine and refined it and turned it and specialized it, turned it into what it is today, which is why you'll find that most grape varieties are derived from French names. Okay, so there are two general sort of types of wine or wine regions in the world. You've got Old World and New World. Okay, Old World wines are wines that come from countries that have been making wine for hundreds of years. This is being like France, Italy, Portugal, and then you've got New World wines, which are wines that come from newer countries. Chile. Spain is also an Old World. Okay, but New World, you've got Chile, Argentina, Australia, America, etc., etc. Okay. Now, wine, it will come in essentially 4 different ways. You've got your whites, your reds, rosés, and sparklings. Well, but sparkling can be white or red. So it's the method that they use to make it sparkling, which we'll get onto in another video. Okay, so common varietals for reds, which most people would have heard of. You've got Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, Merlot, and Pinot Noir. Those are the most common red wines that you'll find, and the ones that just about everybody who's heard of wine will have heard of. For whites, the most common ones you've got would be Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Riesling, and perhaps Viognier. Okay, there are hundreds of other varietals that are around, but those what we would call minor varietals or lesser varietals, and are usually used as blends with the major varietals to give them a more refined flavor or a different characteristic. So one question that I get asked quite a lot when it comes to wine is why do they bother putting the vintage? Why do they put the year on the bottle? Well, it's a very good question, and the reason why is because every single year is going to have different growing conditions. You're going to have different rainfall, you're going to have different soil conditions, different temperatures, etc. There are so many factors that can affect the taste of the grapes before they're harvested and fermented. So it's important to put the vintage of the wine on the bottle so that somebody who's in the know will say, okay, 2016 in this particular region in Western Australia was like, there was this much sunlight and there was this much rainfall and it was like this and it was like that, and that's going to have X effect on the taste of the wine. So that is why there is a vintage on the bottle, and that is also why it's very important that when if you are in the F&B line and if you are serving a bottle of wine to a customer, it is always very important to highlight the vintage of the wine to the customer, because if they know what they're talking about and they say, and the menu says 2016 but it's a 2017, then you might end up having a problem with the customer, because they will know that that they specifically wanted a 2016 because they like that year, and they don't want a 2017 because that's not that wasn't a particularly good year. Another question that I get asked quite often about wine is why do you decant it, and when do you decant it? What's the reason for decanting? Well, decanting basically speeds up the process of oxidization in the wine. Now, I know in a previous video I was saying that we don't want oxidization in a wine, but to a certain degree it is not a bad thing. Okay, so once a wine has been opened for 4 days, the oxidization will have completely ruined it. But if you're talking about a wine that's been open for an hour or two, well then that's a different thing, because basically once wine has been open to the air, it will start to mature a bit. It will open up. Okay, and sometimes when you have a wine which is very young or contracted, and you really want to open it up, you want to get those flavors going, that is when you would decant it, because it will increase the amount of oxygen which is in contact with the wine, and it will make it open up more quickly. If you didn't want to decant it, you could always just open the bottle and leave it there for 2 hours and then drink it. Okay, but if you wanted to drink it straight away, you just put it into a decanter, give it a bit of a swirl around, and Bob's your uncle, she's good to go. So a couple of general rules when it comes to red and white wines. Now this is really important, especially in Malaysia, because while most people who drink wine in Malaysia will have a decent idea of what they're doing, there are still a lot of customers that I get which request for things that you really shouldn't. Okay, now we'll start with reds. Okay, the first thing that you need to know about reds is that they should never be served at less than 10 degrees. Okay, 10 degrees Celsius is about where that's the coldest you want to go. 10 to 15 degrees is ideal for reds. It's when the wine is going to be most open and the flavors are going to come out. Above 15 degrees it's going to be too hot, the alcohol is going to evaporate off, and you just it's going to ruin the nose for you. If it's colder than that, then it's going to be like it's going to constrict the wine, it's going to cut the flavor profile, and it's going to ruin the finish. Okay. On the flip side, white wines, now this does somewhat depend on the variety of the wine, but in general, white wines you do want to drink chilled. You want to drink somewhere between maybe 5 and 7 degrees Celsius, so cold but not like freezing. Okay, if you're serving a glass of white wine at 1 degree Celsius, it's going to have the same effect. It's going to constrict it, and it's going to cut that flavor profile right down. Okay, so some other general rules is red wine should be served in larger glasses. Why is this? Well, because you want it to open up. You want the bouquet to release, and in a larger glass, with a red wine which is served at a warmer temperature, that's going to happen faster. Whereas with a white wine glass, it's smaller, it's not going to warm up as quickly, and you're basically preserving the bouquet. Okay. So some other things that generally confuse a lot of people when it comes to wines is the terms that we use when we're describing a wine. Things like dry, sweet, fruity, acidic, earthy, or the minerality. Okay. Now, I think the most confusing one out of any of that is dry, because how can you have a dry liquid, right? Well, it's not. We're not actually talking about dryness in terms of, you know, liquidity. We're talking about how it feels in your mouth, and you know, the sort of sensation that you get. This is mostly common with red wines, especially really rich, powerful wines like Cab Sauv and Shiraz. When you drink it, you actually get this sort of dry sensation in your mouth, and that is when we would use the word dry to describe something. Another one which is greatly confused is fruity. Okay, so fruity doesn't mean sweet. Okay, fruity and floral doesn't mean sweet. It just means that there is an abundance of fruit flavors. So when you taste wine, you know, you're going to hold it in your mouth, and you're going to slowly get these sort of you know, sensations that come to your mind, like, oh, you know, passion fruit and peach and strawberry, or, you know, cherries or chocolate. You know, there's a million other things, you know, that could do with it. Acidity. Now, acidity refers to the sensation of sourness. Okay, it doesn't mean that it's going to burn you or anything like that. It just means that if you taste a wine and it's got this sort of sour character to it, that means that it's acidic. Okay. Other terms that you might come across are earthy and minerality. Minerality is things like you know, a touch of saltiness, which usually comes from the soil conditions. And same things with earthy. You know, if you get this sort of like you know, maybe like wet grass, or like for example, certain Rieslings will have this sort of cut grass. Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is a perfect example of that. A very common characteristic of Sauvignon Blanc on the nose is this sort of like fresh cut grass. This is what we would describe as an earthy flavor. Okay, so that really about does it for the basics. I think in a couple of videos time we'll probably go into some more detail about the specific grape varietals and what you can expect, and how growing in different regions of the world will affect the taste of the wine. So I hope this has been informative, and as always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and until next time, have a good one.